Hi, I'm Stephen Reich here at the pokepress studios in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm on the phone with Anne from Pikipi Podcast, and it's time for episode 3 of our discussion of the Japanese and English ending themes of the Pokemon movies. So since this is episode 3, of course, we'll be talking about Pokemon 3 the movie, and on the Japanese side, we have The Day a Rainbow Was Born, and on the English side, we have To Know the Unknown. So, Anne, why don't you start giving us some of the production details of The Day a Rainbow Was Born?
Okay, so The Day a Rainbow Was Born, Niji ga umareta hi. It was written by Akihito Toda and then composed by Hirokazu Tanaka. And this is the same team that brought us Together with the Wind and a lot of the songs that we love in Pokemon, Mazase, Pokemon Master, etc. So they're kind of at this point the go-to for when they need songs for the Pokemon anime. The recording artist, the singer, is Kumiko Mori, and she's really interesting because she's kind of an opera singer, like Western style opera, which is kind of makes her different from, the other opera singer we've had on Together with the Wind, Kobayashi Sachiko, who's more traditional Japanese enka operatic style. So I kind of find that different and interesting, her placement of vowels and her vibration. Like, she's just a very accomplished singer. And she also does a lot of work for, Disney Channel Japan and stuff. So if you're into a lot of kids programming, you've probably seen her around. And I've not been able to find it where this is, but she is credited for being the original voice of Pikachu, even though I believe Ikoue Otani is credited for the first episode. So where she does Pikachu's voice is a mystery to me, but that's a mystery somebody can track down on their spare time.
It is interesting to sort of have those two different styles that are kind of in the same vein, but also significantly different. Any idea? I guess we can assume that this song was written for this movie, unlike what we believe for the second movie, Twa and Ma, we're pretty sure was not written for this movie. Does that seem like this time they did write it for the movie?
I would think so. It fits very well lyrically with the movie, and then again also just being that the two of them, a lot of their breadth of work is teaming up together to write Pokemon songs and movie ending themes. So I would imagine that if it wasn't written specifically for the movie, that they were pretty much in that vein when conceiving the song.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, if we go to the other side, to English, of course, we have To Know the Unknown, which was written by John Siegler and John Leffler, who, of course, wrote the original English Pokemon anime theme, as well as a number of the seasons after the first one. Lyrics, though, are actually by Norman Grossfeld, who you may remember as sort of being in charge of the dub and a lot of the translation aspects of it during the 4Kids era. So, very obviously, this was written for the movie. Unlike the other two movies, the soundtrack for this one, this is pretty much sort of the only sort of major-ish artist. In a sense, in case you're wondering, was an offshoot, kind of loosely, of the late 80s, early 90s Mickey Mouse Club. Some of the members had been from there. And in fact, one of the early members was Britney Spears, before she went off and did a solo career. The group was co-managed by Lou Pearlman, who actually has connections to quite a number of folks on the first couple Pokemon movies. He helped form the Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, O-Town, Aaron Carter, and a number of others. And later ended up getting sued by most, if not all of them. He's responsible in many ways for sort of the pop sound of the late 90s and early 2000s. But sort of after that time, he sort of faded away and eventually got arrested in relationship to a Ponzi scheme and actually died in prison. Obviously not a happy story, but given his involvement with so many of these groups, we kind of had to mention it at some point. But as for Innocence themselves, they did have an album. It never really got that much traction. Neither did any of their singles, so I'm guessing that actually a lot of folks, this is the only Innocence song they might actually know.
Yeah, definitely for me, if it weren't for this song, they never would have hit my radar.
All right. Well, going back to the Japanese side, what are your thoughts about? You said it's operatic, but in a different way than Together with the Wind from the first Japanese movie. How would you describe some of the differences?
Well, again, it's Western style opera, so it's kind of got that very sustained vibrato, very rounded vowels that if you speak Japanese, there's a placement that's almost a little bit nasally that's very common, especially in female singers. It translates over, and you can hear that really hard in a lot of enka singers. And for that reason, a lot of Westerners often don't get on board with enka because they hear that really nasally type of, vibrato that almost seems to be switching notes and singing off key. And, it's so different from our Western tastes that some people just can't, get with it. But because Kumiko Mori, trained in Western style opera, she has very much, a kind of style that we would kind of gravitate to over here, the Josh Groban, blah sort of sound. So even though she's singing Japanese, there is kind of a Western sensibility to it that's kind of gives you a nice sort of soft ballad feel. And it's just an interesting combination of vocal sounds, I think.
It definitely gives off a different presence than what we saw in the Together with the Wind. It's probably a little more intimate and secluded. It's obviously not as bombastic as that song from the first movie gets towards the end, which maybe is better tied into sort of the relationship mechanic both between Ash and his mom and Molly and her parents. So maybe that was what they were going for there, because this is definitely a scope-wise kind of a smaller movie in many ways. It doesn't involve sort of this huge group of Pokemon assembling like we see in the second movie. Does that sound like a good characterization to you?
Absolutely. It's a small personal movie about a little girl's trauma. And the song is, again, a small person deciding that through whatever traumatic thing life throws at them, they're going to find a way to smile. So I think, that fits very well, that it's more intimate, it's more softer and personal, and, we don't have the choir of children in the background, that kind of thing.
So overall, definitely a different take there.
Yeah, they're going for a different feel.
And then, coming back to the English side, we have To Know the Unknown. At first at least, and I'm not going to say the song is super deep or anything like that, but it definitely, listening to it, seems sort of like a fairly straightforward pop song. And it sort of talks about, various things and sort of debates about how important is it to sort of understand everything versus sometimes you have to sort of move past things. Do you feel, Anne, like that really ties into the movie? If so, how?
It does and it doesn't for me, because on the one hand, you could almost make a case that this doesn't fit the movie or the series at all, because so much of the series is we want to explore the unknown. We want to know the unknown. We want to find out the mysteries of the Pokemon world. That's what the narrator says every episode. But in this specific movie, we've got a little girl worried about her future, and, we've got people bogged down by the tragedies in their life and unable to focus on the beauty that is around them, and unable to reach out to the world because of fear. So if you look at it almost from Ash's perspective of I don't need to know, what the future holds. I don't need to worry too much about these things I don't understand, as long as I have the friends and family who support me that I do understand, I'm okay. So it does and it doesn't. You almost have to do some acrobatics and thinking for a song that's not, especially poetic and deep.
Yeah, I'd say probably the deepest lyrical part is where it sort of compares Revelations to castles in the sand, which I guess is just kind of funny now because, of course, we're recording this around the time when Sun and Moon comes out, and of course there is a sandcastle Pokemon in that, so maybe that's just why that sticks out a little bit more. But, maybe it sort of does reflect Ash a little bit better. Do you think the Japanese one maybe reflects some of the other characters a little bit more?
I do. The Day a Rainbow Was Born seems very specific to the main theme of this movie, which is Molly's journey and, her being able to open up despite the tragedy that has happened in her life and move away from her isolation. It talks about, the rain will end soon. This horrible time is going to be over and you're going to be able to find a way to smile and reach out to people. And it talks about true isolation, trying to get away from it all and be really alone and block the world out. It doesn't actually exist. And in time, you'll realize that. So it kind of feels almost like a song from Delia to Molly, or the world at large to Molly, maybe, kind of encouraging her to open her heart and being able to, it talks about give your sadness wings, and, meeting other people's tears and sharing that grief. And from there, a rainbow will be born. And so, yeah, I think that one definitely fits the characters a bit more explicitly, at least.
What about the musical styles of To Know the Unknown? There's a lot of acoustic guitar, and then there's some synth in there. Very much, I would say, a late 90s, early 2000s pop instrumentation, a typical pop instrumentation from that era.
Oh, yeah. It definitely my style of listening. I love the sound of To Know the Unknown. It's a beautiful song, right with my tastes.
And although I have to say, in 2001 when this came out, I do think that even prior to, say, 9/11, which was later that year, that this type of music was kind of showing its age. Do you feel that was the case back then?
I wouldn't have noticed because, like I said, this was my jam. So my musical tastes kind of hit the 90s era and never really left. So I don't think I would have noticed at the time if it was. When I think about it, what you're saying, I think I agree. When I think of what was popular that year, yeah, probably it was.
Yeah, I mean, that era of music was definitely targeted at a very specific audience, and much like the Pokemon audience, that did kind of grow up. Although, like I said, I don't think that either of these are a bad song. I don't think that To Know the Unknown is especially dated, but maybe at the time it didn't, shortly thereafter, it didn't seem quite in place with how folks maybe wanted to perceive music then. But that was kind of just a sort of a discussion point.
Yeah.
Now, one thing we should definitely mention is that there is The Day a Rainbow Was Born, there is an English version of that performed by the same person. What are your thoughts on that?
It's very interesting. And like I said, with her having so much Western opera training and being able to speak English and the like, I mean, I guess it was a good enough choice to have her do both versions for the single rather than bring in another artist. But the lyrics don't have the same rhyming sensibility that we would have in the West. And then she does have a bit of an accent on top of that. I have trouble getting on board with it. So it's interesting to me. And I appreciate it on the single, but it's not, one that I listen to because I want to feel good and connect to the movie. How do you
know
feel?
if Kumiko has any English background, or was she just trying to do the best she could? Or
she has some. She lived in the United States and then also Italy, and again, that's kind of where when she studied opera and stuff, she had a lot of English and Western language training, and she's done a little bit of work in English countries as an actor as well. So it's, again, sometimes your accent just never leaves you, but it's not like she's completely unfamiliar with it. So, again, some of her pronunciations are quite good. Some of them are not as great. It's just a mixed bag, I think.
Yeah, it sort of serves as a comparison going back to the second movie dub soundtrack to The Extra Mile, which was performed by Laura Pausini, who is, I don't know, she's from Europe, as she does stuff, I believe, in Spanish and Italian, and she worked extraordinarily hard. But I will say that Kumiko's English work is certainly much better than my Japanese, so yeah. I will always give folks credit for that.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to get pronunciations. I think she does a pretty decent job, but again, it's just the rhyme scheme works against her. I don't have a credit for who did the translation, if it was like, Akiko Toda or Hip Tanaka, or if they hired somebody else to do it. Like, it makes grammatical sense, but melodically, like, sometimes the emphasis of where we would put on a word is a little odd. Like, a native English speaker might make a different choice. So I think it's just a lot of things were working against her in this song to make it appeal to Westerners. But I think to a Japanese speaking audience, it actually probably was really quite enjoyable.
So I'm guessing from your response there that you don't think it would have been a good idea to either use the English version in the dub credits, or to get another person perhaps to try and re-sing those lyrics, a native English speaker to do the same.
I don't think it would have been a good idea. I mean, even if you got a native English speaker to sing these lyrics, it would have been an uphill battle still, because again, it just doesn't rhyme the way we think it should rhyme.
It is difficult, and I'm sure some folks out there would have been completely fine with that, but, yeah. I don't mind the replacement of To Know the Unknown. I still think it's a good song. It's maybe not as impressive as what was done there, but as far as starting from a clean slate, I think that To Know the Unknown does a reasonably good job there.
Yeah, I think To Know the Unknown does exactly what they meant it to. It's a fun, beautiful song that kind of gives you kind of a warm, glowy feeling after the movie. And again, it's something that's very appealing to the audience listening to it. So
yeah, it definitely, I think, informs a lot of dub endings to come, which for the most part are going to be written by the usual Pokemon writing team going forward.
Mm.
All right, well, this is sort of coming to the third part where we kind of decide which one we like more. This one is kind of, I wouldn't say equal, but it's kind of a split decision. I would probably give The Day a Rainbow Was Born more points for ambition and effort. To Know the Unknown is much more of a fun song to me, and of course being in English, not counting the English version of the Japanese ending, is still a bit more resonant. I don't hate either song. I'm not sure I like either of them as much as some of the stuff that was done on other movies. Is that about where you fall?
I'm split, but for different reasons. Like, To Know the Unknown is a song that I still listen to, like it's still on my playlist, and I happily listen to it whenever it comes up. So it gets points on that side, but I do think The Day a Rainbow Was Born, it fits the movie, it fits the mood, it fits the themes. So if I have to say which one was better, like, to me, The Day a Rainbow Was Born does a better job of a movie ending theme. Whereas To Know the Unknown is an awesome Pokemon song, but it falls a little bit short in the matching sense.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
They're close.
They're close, but they're definitely different in terms of their structure, in terms of their purpose, more so than, say, the first movie ending themes were. And like I said, if I had to put one above the other, I'd probably pick The Day a Rainbow Was Born on technique, but neither of these is terrible. Neither of these is my favorite Pokemon song ever, though. I like them. I don't know that I particularly love either one, I think is what I would say.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Particularly, obviously on both sides we've had a ton more ending themes come out after that, and that's maybe helped put these into a little more perspective.
It's true. If you have the breadth of Pokemon music, they sometimes... there are going to be a few that just don't quite stack up to their friends, and that's okay.
All right, well, I think that's going to do it for sort of the main part where we talk about the ending themes. Not as much to talk about, I think, with these two ending themes. I think other movies will probably have more to talk about with some of the later movies. Certainly the fourth movie coming up is very much a dichotomy between the English and the Japanese.
It sure is.
But for the time now, so this was kind of an odd release because the first two movies had these pop soundtracks that were produced by Atlantic Records, and then this third one they switched things up. So there are sort of two albums that have a lot of overlap on the dub side. And there's Totally Pokemon, which came out early in 2001, around the time Season 3, I think. Well, it was few months in, but it came out early in that year. And then there's Pokemon 3, the Ultimate Soundtrack. And the tracks between the two are very, very similar. They have almost all the same tracks, with the exception, of course, being on the movie soundtrack. There is the movie remix version of Pokemon Joto, which is same vocals, but very different instrumentation, kind of like what was done for High Touch for the Arceus movie in Japan, and where they took the original vocals and drastically changed the underlying instruments. And then, of course, we have To Know the Unknown, and we also have some stuff from the score of the third movie. It's never been released in its entirety, but they do have some passages from it on this CD. So let's sort of talk about this. There was this group called Joto, which was this 3 men, 3 women group. I was basically created to create most of these songs here. A lot of them were featured in the ending of episodes. What are your overall thoughts about this sort of compilation?
Well, it was definitely an interesting time in Pokemon music. I think, I was starting to get a little too old to really enjoy, the Poke Rap and some of those things. So I didn't appreciate it at the time as much as I do now. But they wrote a lot of just really interesting, fun songs. But I was always really confused about the split between that and Totally Pokemon as well. Because, again, some of them just don't seem to fit the movie on Pokemon 3, the soundtrack.
Definitely, the repurposing definitely didn't produce as integrated, even as maybe even the first movie where most of the songs were curated versus the second, where most of them were written or tweaked or whatever for that soundtrack. I do kind of have to agree that this is sort of a way to sort of, I guess, try and feed things back into the series, maybe?
Maybe. Now that I look back on it, I appreciate the songs as songs a lot more, but I remember at the time being a little disappointed just because that wasn't what I wanted out of a movie soundtrack. But that's no criticism of Joto and the work they did in, again, making a lot of really fun Pokemon songs.
Yeah, I mean, there are some new things, like Song of Jigglypuff, really like that. Two Perfect Girls is also a great one.
Yeah.
And then you have sort of He Drives Me Crazy, which is sort of the inverse of Misty's song from the To Be a Master album. Not that it's ass singing, but that it's Misty sort of doing the other side of the reasons she kind of finds Ash very frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of the hate side of the love-hate relationship, I guess you could say.
Right.
And, a couple of the songs on there, Pikachu, You and Me and Pokemon, were originally developed for Pokemon Live and sort of adapted here.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the GS Poke Rap GS, of course, which maybe certainly not as iconic as the first Poke Rap, but I still say it's better than Hoenn Poke Rap, which I swear is one of the worst, probably the worst vocal English Pokemon song ever. So say what you will about Poke Rap GS, it's certainly not the bottom of the barrel. So of the songs that are on the Pokemon 3 album that are recycled from Totally Pokemon, which ones are there any you think do work for the movie?
For the movie specifically? Not really. I think you could make a case for Biggest Part of My Life. But again, that's less the movie and more the series as a whole.
Yeah, I guess it was kind of a disappointment to sort of pick this up and just, it's sort of that syndrome of the late CD era where you'd get another album that had just a few things, but you still had to pay full price for it, which...
Yeah, no, I would almost say Totally Pokemon has a song on there that I would say might have fit the series, the soundtrack CD more, Never Too Far From Home.
Oh, yeah, that would have been, it is kind of surprising. Let me just double check.
If they switched one of those tracks around, I think they might have had something there, but...
That is really surprising that, Never Too Far From Home. I mean, you can kind of put that in maybe any Pokemon movie, especially like after the first generation or whatever. But
it's true, but at least it ties back to Ash's mom.
And to a lesser extent, I suppose, Molly's parents, who are kind of trapped rather, in a way, very far from home. But sort of...
Right, but that sense of family is not necessarily a place, but what's in your heart. Yeah, you could make a case for that, I think.
But yeah, so I know a lot of folks do feel like Pokemon 3 is a redundant soundtrack, especially in the US where both Totally Pokemon and Pokemon 3 were released very close together. I think in some markets, Pokemon 3 was released, but it wasn't Totally Pokemon or a localized version of it in that region or vice versa. And I know that I think in Australia, they actually packaged the score to the second Pokemon movie with Pokemon 3, so you got a little more value there. It is kind of a weird duality where there's a couple tracks in one, a couple tracks that are only on the other, and the value is kind of debatable. At least in this day and age, you can buy things by the track, and that's not so much of an issue.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think that about covers what we can get from here. In our next episode, of course, we'll be covering Pokemon Forever. And the very, very different songs there, both of which I like, but for fairly different reasons. All right, well, thank you very much, Anne. It's been great having you on for another one of these.
Oh, thank you.
This has been Stephen Reich from the pokepress studios in Madison, Wisconsin, on the phone with Anne from Pikipi Podcast.